So the deceptive nature is there amongst the phenomenon and the jinn. Now, when it comes to abductions, this is a very interesting one. This is a passage from a book by John E. Mack. Now, John E. Mack was a Harvard professor. He was the head of psychiatry in Harvard. And he was a very respectable academic. And he decided to study the abduction phenomenon. He wrote a book, I think it's called Abductions. He wrote a book on this topic as well. And what he highlights, as you can see on this by this passage here, he outlines that this is not mass hysteria. People are not having mass hysteria. These are people that are having experiences that, you know, when they share the experiences, and you collect the data and you take these, you know, what people are seeing and have experiencing during this abduction phenomenon, and you correlate the data, you see that they're having very similar experiences, yet they haven't, you know, cross corroborated or shared information with each other. So it's not just mass hysteria. These are people that may live across the world in different parts of the world who are having very similar experiences, and they are sharing their experiences. So he believed that there was more to the abduction phenomenon than just people dreaming or seeing things, or just a psychological event. And he was ridiculed for this quite badly as well, as you know, it's probably not surprising.
I can imagine they did ridicule him. Sorry, I was disagreeing with you. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think going back to the paper that was taken down by Harvard earlier this year, again, it may be back up, I haven't checked, but some of the speculation around that was because Harvard had run into some of this, I guess people looking at them funny, and why is Harvard dealing with aliens and UFOs and ET and all of these topics when John E. Mack published this. So they didn't want the same to happen again in 2024 with the two Harvard professors authoring this article. So maybe that was one of the reasons they pulled it down or redacted it. But again, we don't know what the real reasons are, but it may possibly be related to what John E. Mack did, that he published this book, he did a lot of work in this, and his conclusions, he really believed people were really experiencing something very real. And this was, again, very difficult, as we can understand, for people to swallow, because, as a professor of a reputable university in the secular age, to talk about such topics is not fashionable, right? So, but you have to commend these people, and I commend the Harvard professors as well, who actually were brave enough. And there was Dr. Masters from another institution, I don't remember which one, who again co-authored. So there were 3 authors to this article. You have to commend them for being brave enough to talk about this topic on an academic level. So abductions, according to the top academics that have actually studied this, and have concluded that there's more to this phenomenon. And if you look at it beyond the academic sphere, I mean, people have been reporting abductions for as far as you can look back. People have been reporting this phenomenon. We see it within the Islamic tradition as well. There's a very interesting narration. I'll just paraphrase. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Where in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he was the Emir, an interesting event happened where a man basically disappears, right? His wife comes to Umar and says, my husband has disappeared. It's probably been quite a long while. And I think she wants to get married again. And he says, give it 4 years. So she goes away and she returns after 4 years, and she says, he's still not back. And then Umar gives her permission to go and get married again. And what would you know? The guy appears again, comes back after a very long time, and he says, where's my wife? And then Umar basically says, well, look, you were gone. No one knew if you were alive, if you were dead. And then basically he says, well, what's your excuse? And he says to Umar that I was going to pray Isha one night, and a group of jinn abducted me. They took me away. And they kept me as a captive for many, many years, until another group of jinn, believing jinn, came and they defeated them. And they realized I was Muslim. So they asked me, they said that we can't keep Muslim captives because we're believers. Maybe it's a rule that they have amongst themselves. So they offered him, you can either stay with us as a free man, or you can return back. And he chose to return back. So they brought him back. And they dropped him off, I guess, where they, to his home. And that was his reason. And interestingly, Umar accepted this. So what this highlights to us, that this was not, this probably wasn't a unique occurrence or a one-off occurrence. Things similar were probably reported at the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. And there's other narrations, such as, narrations of the Prophet ﷺ about keeping your kids in after dark and not letting them go out so they're not snatched by the jinn or taken away by the jinn. So the concept of the jinn taking people away, in Ibn Taymiyyah's essays, again, he mentions that there are reports of people that are taken out of their homes by the jinn at night, taken through the walls, literally, he says, in the essays, and out of the city gates, and there's lights in the sky, and they've taken away. Furthermore, again, it's just come to mind now, Sheikh Umar al-Asqar, Dr. Umar al-Asqar, in his book, The World of Jinns and Shayateen, he dedicates 3 pages in his book, page 184 onwards, to this topic. And he mentions, that he believes that the UFO phenomenon is related to the jinn, for many of the reasons that we have stated. So again, it's not something new. It's not a new theory we're presenting. Some of the scholars of the past have mentioned this as well. Umar al-Asqar directly mentions it in his book, and he puts down the whole UFO phenomenon to the jinn itself. But interestingly here, we see that the abduction phenomenon does exist in the Islamic tradition, and it's directly ascribed to the jinn. The jinn abduct people, have abducted people, and here is one specific case of that. So again, a clear parallel between the UFO phenomenon, or the abduction phenomenon within the UFO phenomenon, and the jinn. The fourth one is possession and attachment. Just a quick note on this one. So there's a new term that they use within the sort of UFO research sphere. It's called the hitchhiker effect. This is, as the name quite evidently suggests, it's like when people go to these areas where there is high strangeness, or where people have experiences, most times they leave with with something that becomes attached to them, literally hitchhikes with them out of that place, and then gives them trouble later on. Skinwalker Ranch is a very interesting place, again, in Utah, in America. There's actually a documentary that History Channel have been running for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years, documenting, they've got some scientists on the ranch now in Utah at Skinwalker Ranch, and they are trying to document this phenomenon, which is baffling them, and they can't really make sense of it anyway. And again, it's a TV show, so how much truth there is to it, Allah knows best. But I think it's very interesting. Again, it's a very popular show, and it's become one of the best shows on the channel. But there's the hitchhiker effect that's mentioned there. Government officials that have gone onto the ranch, they've left with something that's become attached to them, and that's not only affected them, but it's affected their family members over the months and years later. Jim Simivan, I mentioned earlier, he had a hitchhiker type of experience as well, where something became attached to him and his family and then troubled them, and they saw things and, were terrorized by these entities and so on. And again, it's very similar to this is probably the easiest one for people, for Muslims especially, to understand, because, just as a sort of a side point, when you think about the concept of jinn amongst the Muslims today, the notion is very narrow. So when we think about the word jinn, we think, okay, supernatural beings that possess and are evil. And it pretty much stops there, right? But there's so much more to the concept of jinn that we're not aware of. And this one is probably the most evident one, which is this whole possession phenomenon or attachment phenomenon. People get ruqya done when they have attachments or possessions. Now, these terms, obviously, many people define them in many different ways. But I think it's interesting that you're having something similar. When someone is affected by jinn or possessed by jinn, again, there's something follows them, goes back with them, terrorizes them, affects them, can psychologically affect them, put them into some, lead to mental illnesses, can affect their family members, etc., etc. So that this particular point of comparison is quite evident and quite interesting, that we're seeing this amongst the UFO phenomenon. And it's interesting. I think this is going to be news for some people, because when they think about UFOs, you don't think about attachment or hitchhiker effect or beings that appear and are supernatural type beings. You would just think about saucers flying in the air, UFOs flying in the air. D.W. Pasulka mentions this in a book, Encounters, that what we're seeing even today, as much as the topic is being accepted in the mainstream media, is just one part of the story. You're just shown the nuts and bolts, as they call it, the physical craft or whatever they're capturing on camera, etc. But there's so much more to it. People that have these experiences, they have follow-on experiences where they see things, beings approach them, tell them stories, you know, demonic figures appear to them, terrorize their families. All of this stuff is happening, but most people don't mention this because, again, this is just too weird and too strange for them to mention. They just feel they'll be ridiculed and ignored completely. But this is a real aspect of the phenomenon which is going on as well, which is being documented. So this, again, is in line with the possession phenomenon that we see within Islam. Now, the objectives. So this is the fifth part or the last part of comparison. And I think it's an interesting question to ask. Now, from the Islamic perspective, the perspective of jinn, it's quite evident what the objective is. You know, Allah mentions it in the Quran, you know, it's very clear on this, that the jinn, the shayateen, their objective is to misguide human beings, take people away from the straight path, take people away from the worship of God. We see this throughout history as well, where, you know, we see, so if you read some of the accounts or the texts of previous cultures, they write about beings who appear to them in the form of gods, right? And therefore, these people normally see them as gods, and then they fall into submission to them and end up worshiping them, etc. It's almost like we're seeing a new modern version of that. But the thing is, from a jinn perspective, it's clear. Okay, so they want to misguide people. They want to take people away from the worship of God to worshiping whatever else. Now, if you were to look at this from the perspective of the 21st century, like we live in a time where people are secular, people don't believe in gods, people don't believe in the supernatural, people are proud of the technology that we have today, right? Now, if the jinn, hypothetically speaking, I mean, if Shaitan was to sit down with his minions around a table and have this discussion and say, look, okay, what is going to be the best way we can sort of really misguide or direct people towards worshiping us? How could we do it? Now, considering the sort of techno-secular mindset that people have, taking on the form of extraterrestrial beings with superior technology, and that's what we're seeing. When we look at the phenomenon, what have we seen? We've seen the best technology that the greatest superpower of the world has today, which are the military jets, the fighter jets, the best of the best. And these craft or these things are running circles around them, and they can't control them. They can't do anything about it. What does this do psychologically? Immediately, I mean, if the elite of the world are being run circles around, then the whole of the world is going to think, well, whatever this is far superior to us, is far greater than us, right? And then if you consider all of the stories of people that have experience with these beings that tell them that we have the solution to your problems, we have the technology, we can fix your problems on Earth, etc., etc. Again, this aura of superiority is being created, you know. And if you look again, if you go on social media and you go into these, UFO, Twitter UFO or X UFO as it's called now, the hashtag, and you look at these communities, many of these people, they're not religious, they're secular, they don't believe in God, but they are almost besotted over this phenomenon. To the point where they just can't get enough of it. Even Professor D.W. Pasulka, she appeared on a podcast not too long ago, last year. And at a point during the discussion, her and the host almost got giddy. They started laughing, like, they love the fact that, because they started to have what they call experiences, right? Now, this is a professor of religious studies who's having experiences. And they were fascinated by this. And they were talking about changing the diet and becoming vegan and stuff like this so they can have a better connection, not drinking. It's almost like a religious experience, a new age religious experience for the secular mind. And it's phenomenal if you think about it from that perspective. What's happening is very interesting.